to episode 1 of In the Know, our show where we invite you to come discover different departments here at Southern New Hampshire University's College of Online and Continuing Education, and to explore ways that our faculty experiences intertwine with these departments as we work in conjoined efforts to create the best online student learning experience in the world. In this episode, Mary McDevitt, Director of Faculty Training and Development, sits down for a conversation with 3 of our new student advisors who have the dual role and distinction of also being adjunct faculty here at COCE. Let's take a moment to meet these advisors who work with our new students through their first 3 terms with us.
Hi, my name is Cassandra. I am a teacher in the English department. I have my MFA in creative writing, and I've been an advisor at SNHU for just over 3 years.
Hi, my name is Vasilios Kostakis. I'm an instructor in the history department, and I have been an advisor for about 2 years now as a new student advisor.
My name is Rob Thyberg. I am a new student advisor and an instructor in the sociology department. I have been both a new student advisor and instructor at SNHU for about 3.5 years, and I really enjoy it.
Excellent. Well, it's so nice to have you all with us today, and we'd love to just jump right into the conversation. Mary, if you will.
So I wanted to meet today because I think it's important to highlight and recognize the value that academic advisors can have in working with our adjuncts. As student supports, advisors play an integral role in guiding students through to graduation and can really reinforce the efforts of instructors in the classroom. In your unique dual roles, one might say that being an academic advisor and an instructor puts you at an advantage. As internal staff, you're really in the position to have a lot of knowledge on resources readily available. And here in the mill yard, you also have the opportunity to walk up a floor or down to talk to a student's advisor. Vasilios, for the instructors who are listening in, what should they know about the culture we have here in the physical space, and how might this inform the way that they reach out to staff here in the mill, either in academics or on the student support teams?
Mary, first off, thank you for having me. This is great. And just in a nutshell, the culture at SNHU, it's very unique. I've actually been doing some research on culture in companies for a project I'm doing on the side for my own personal goals as an advisor. But normally in a company, what tends to happen traditionally is that there's a common perception that if a manager has an idea, that idea is naturally going to be the one that gets enforced, or that idea is going to trump ideas that come from lower level. And here at SNHU, that is entirely not the case. It's understood that advisors, admissions, and instructors, we're the ones who are interacting with the students. So we are going to naturally be the experts on where should the direction of the company be going. So input and ideas from lower level ranks is highly encouraged at SNHU, and that's a wonderful thing because it increases agency on our part. It makes us feel like where our input is being valued. Very, very important. That's one aspect of our culture that's extremely positive. We're not managers, we're advisors, but all those higher-ups are still accessible to us for discussion, for collaboration, for suggestions on ideas, for promoting ideas. Everybody is ready to work with everybody for the sole purpose of innovation, for moving forward, for productivity, and for the success of the student.
So Vasilios, you're talking about the collaborative opportunity you have here in the physical space. How might that translate for a remote instructor who's never been here before? What avenues of support have you found most helpful?
The biggest thing really to take away as a remote instructor, especially when you're the one that's interacting with the student, you're interacting with the Blackboard setup. The best thing to do is the second you notice anything that could be adjusted, talk to your team lead. talk to an advisor, talk to anybody, ask them questions about, who are other contacts that you could work with, or suggestions to to Blackboard. My first semester, I saw something in my Blackboard course that I thought could be adjusted. I immediately talked to my team lead, and I said, this should be adjusted, and I got immediate feedback on the exact directions on what I should do in order to get that feedback sent to the right place. So really, it doesn't matter who you ask first. You will be directed to the right person. Just connect with people. That's the biggest thing.
So to reiterate and reinforce what I think I'm hearing from you, one of the key components in getting support and feeling part of a community is finding that avenue to engage in a meaningful dialogue and share thoughts about your experience. And to find that avenue that works best for you. And we have several options, such as your team leads, your deans, the design feedback ticketing system, on thoughts about your course, and our faculty support team. Instructors and advisors share the responsibility of educating students, but that information looks different. Where the advisor provides information on SNHU, faculty are responsible for the course and its content. Cassandra, when you began to instruct, what was the biggest transition you had to make when navigating those different responsibilities?
As an advisor, especially as a new student advisor where I work specifically with brand new students, I'm used to really being kind of in the trenches with students and having access to that student's big picture. So the student's history, what other courses they're taking, their long-term plans, challenges that they faced. And as a teacher, I've had to really adjust to not having that level of information about every student, and that I really have to rely on that sort of three-way communication, on that relationship with the advisor to best serve that student. And there are a lot of things as an advisor that I do have background in terms of basic financial aid information, how withdrawals affect students, impacts to financial aid, all of that kind of stuff. As an instructor, I have to remember that even when a student asks me about that, even though I do kind of have that insight, it's really best to direct them to their advisor because, again, that advisor does have that big picture information on that student, and that my job is really just to focus on their success in my class. So, for example, last term I had a student who was doing, she was trying really hard. She started off well. She was really in communication with me, which is great. But it sort of seemed like there was just kind of one thing after another in terms of injuries or illnesses or family issues, or and sometimes it's hard when you just have that email communication. You haven't known that student that long to really get a good feed on that or a good read on them. And the advisor was able to help with that. But also the student was asking me questions about, should she withdraw? Should she continue? And as an advisor, that conversation would look one way. Like I talked to the student about exactly what's realistic for them in terms of the work that they can do and how the withdrawal is going to impact them in terms of their financial aid or in terms of their academic standing and, long-term habits and all the long-term implications. And that really wasn't my place in this situation. So as a teacher, I really tried to refer that withdrawal conversation to the advisor, loop the advisor in that we were talking about that, but then really focus on how I can support the student in the classroom. So digging into any issues with the assignments, with their understanding, with the material, and really focusing on my role as an educator based specifically in my subject area and kind of spreading out those other kinds of responsibilities back to the advisor.
I certainly see how it might be challenging with your instructor hat on to focus on the course itself and a student's specific obstacles when you might feel like you want to do the work of your day job. But I also would think that you can really demonstrate the same high level of empathy, compassion, understanding, and flexibility in both roles, keeping in mind that advisors do often have more insight into a student's personal circumstances, their standing, and the impact of making a big educational decision like withdrawal. Rob, when you took on the instructor role, did your opinion of the value of academic advisors shift? And are there challenges that you've encountered being both an advisor and an adjunct instructor?
So yeah, I would say, I guess we can answer these one at a time. So first, one of the interesting things I realized right away is the unique relationships advisors have with students. While an instructor's main focus is helping students master discipline-specific competencies, advisors take a more holistic approach to a student's educational journey. So advisors really have many roles. We're experts at getting students to graduation, right? I feel like that's definitely a unique position as an academic advisor, coming from somebody whose main background was in instructing and being a lecturer at a uni, it was definitely a different experience. And for sure, I would say yes to the first question and yes to the second question as well. So the biggest challenge for me that I encountered being both an advisor and an instructor is maintaining the boundaries between the two roles. And I'm going to hit on some of the stuff that we just spoke about as well. So, for example, as an advisor, I can go over assignments with students, help them look up articles in the library, guide them through various tutoring and writing resources. However, because instructors have the final assignments and things like that, it's important for me to stress to students the need to outreach their instructors with those specific questions. So I can answer a lot of those questions, but just like we were talking about before, I feel like I want to make it clear to students that my job is really to guide them there to graduation, whereas an instructor's job really is there to teach them and be subject matter experts on whatever they're learning in their courses.
And this is a question for everyone. What is your advice for a new instructor coming in, knowing what you know from your role as an academic advisor?
So the big thing here is SNHU has your back. So I feel like anytime you're in a situation where you have any questions, any concerns, just make sure to communicate. Like, we are 100% pro communication. Everyone here is working towards that same goal. So we take different responsibilities for those goals. For example, like we were talking about, instructors are there to be content experts. Advisors are there to be experts on getting students to graduation. But we're working towards those same goals, and that's student success. So communicate with people, communicate with your advisors, communicate with your team lead. We have a tremendous amount of resources here. No one is ever left in the dark. Again, I know that we hit on some of the previous questions as well, but that's exactly what I always kind of feel like. You're not alone, 100%. We're a community here, we're a team, and it's really a community that's based on sharing and working together. And there's not really a competitive environment here. Maybe in a more traditional academic setting, you do have a little bit of that competition going on, but here we're together, we're here to help, and reach out, communicate. That's a big thing here, and it's encouraged, and people love it when people communicate. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, Rob, I could not agree more. Communication, that's absolutely number one priority as a new instructor. The other point that I want to suggest to a new instructor would be pay very close attention to any emails that come to you from instructor development and just the university in general, because if you follow the emails, then you really can't go wrong. That's really when I was an instructor, even being an advisor, when I didn't know what to do, at least if I did what they told me to in the emails, you really can't go wrong at that point. They do an incredible job listing out really clearly the expectations, what you're supposed to do. So my biggest suggestion is just pay close attention to your email.
I think that's great advice. I think I would add a couple of things that I sort of thought about, and this was kind of going back to really capitalizing on that advisor-student relationship as much as possible. And just really recognizing how different that relationship is in some ways, and also the depth of the communication. Advisors are often reaching out to students every 2, 3, or 4 weeks over the phone, and they do have a lot of that phone outreach, and that can make a big difference. I think the best example I can think of for that would be last term. I had a student who I was working really closely with. They were struggling, and we were doing a lot of collaboration and revisions on their final paper. And Tuesday morning rolled around, the final was due, and the student submitted their final, and they had, essentially there was an issue with the upload, and it was missing half of the assignment. And I panicked for the student because I really wanted them to do well. And, I sent the student probably far more emails than were necessary, and I was really hoping to get a hold of them. But because I knew about that relationship, and because I knew about, the availability of the advisors, I was able to reach out, right away to an advisor and say, hey, this happened, what can we do? And that advisor was able to just pick up the phone and call that student and get it resolved right away. I think that's a big thing, and kind of back on that, taking that collaborative piece a step further. I think it can be difficult to adjust to if you're not used to how much the advisor and the student and the instructor and even the team leads, how we're all working together. Because it is kind of unique. In a lot of schools, the instructor kind of owns their classroom and that's it. And nobody else is kind of poking around. And so it can sometimes seem a little, I get, even as a teacher, like I felt that kind of intrusiveness when an advisor sends me an email and says, hey, my student reached out and said such and such, what's going on? And, my gut is always, honestly, there's a little bit of that, like, why are you asking? And I think that, recognizing that as an advisor, we get it. Like, we've heard it all. We're not making any assumptions. Basic part of our job is to follow up and kind of help negotiate those communications. So when we are reaching out, or when you do get an email from an advisor, it's not necessarily, no one's assuming anything's wrong. We're just trying to help everything to kind of settle in.
You made a great point that I think is important to elaborate on as it relates to academic advisors reaching out to faculty about students. If you come from traditional ground universities or even other online institutions that did not follow a model like ours, it may seem like a foreign concept to have advisors reaching out on behalf of students. However, in many ways, academic advisors serve as student support advocates and can provide additional insight to instructors because of the extended relationship they are encouraged to foster throughout a student's academic journey. So a follow-up to that note, as advisors, do you have a closer relationship with those students you advise over those you see in your courses? And if so, why do you think that might be, and what strategies do you employ to build that high level of rapport with students in your courses that you teach?
Great questions. Again, thank you. So I definitely have a closer relationship with students I advise. And the reason for that is, and I think Cassandra and Vasilius both touched on this as well, is that as advisors, we have a lot of outreach. As a new student advisor, if I have a new student, I've probably spoken with them at least 3 times prior to the start of the term on the phone, maybe even more. We call them every week for at least their first couple weeks to make sure everything's going okay. And our relationship, again, we're not there to kind of grade them as advisors. We're really there to be supportive. We're there to help get them acclimated to online learning, specifically the way we do things here at SNHU. We're here to I think be a friend is a little bit of a different, I guess, approach, but it's kind of like that. I would say at least it approximates a friendship, right? They tell us about their families. We discuss their personal problems. We help them through, and I feel like that is definitely forms a closer relationship than we do as instructors. And not that instructors couldn't have that relationship, but for the most part, I think as an instructor, you're going to have a student, you'll work with them for 9 weeks, and after that, you may never speak with that student again. So one of the ways I try to bridge this gap is as an instructor, I really encourage students to set up phone calls with me. So every one of my announcements that I put out starting in week 1, I say, hey, let's schedule a time to talk. Do you want to do a Skype meeting? Do you have this or that? And my whole goal is to get that one-on-one communication with them, particularly for students who are struggling, because a lot of times, depending on what you're teaching, you may have a difficult concept to discuss, and students who don't have a strong academic background, that might be really tough, especially, let's say, you're talking about something theoretical. So the social construction of race, right, or something like that as a sociology instructor. So for me, I really want to get them on the phone, talk with them about these things, and what I've noticed is when I do that, they tend to be a lot more receptive to feedback. They tend to give you better reviews on your performance evaluations. I know that's not what it's about. Like, I spoke with this instructor on the phone. I was really excited that they were willing to meet with me. That does go a long way in showing care, and it also goes a long way in building that rapport, building those relationships. I've had students, past students that I've instructed, actually come back with me, talk with me about certain things in past semesters, and that was really surprising to me when that happened. But it's because we kind of developed a little bit of a closer relationship than I did with most of my other students, because they wanted those phone calls, they wanted that personal interaction. They've talked with me and said, hey, give me some books to read. I want to learn more about this concept or these ideas. What are some books I could read? Could you write me a reference, right? Could you kind of guide me in learning more about these specific subjects and topics? And so I think personalizing that relationship is really getting them on the phone. And I know that can be a little bit difficult and sometimes a little uncomfortable for some instructors, but I would highly recommend doing that. And I think when you do that, you'll be surprised at the quality of interactions you're going to have with that student going forward as well.
Yeah, I think that those are really, really great points. I think that one thing that I think about is, sometimes, again, because as you were saying, we have that kind of longer-term relationship with students. Sometimes I'll see students reach out to me and they'll say, they'll ask me as an advisor, a question very specific to their course, whether it's, if they can turn something in late or, to explain a concept to them or something. And I'll say, well, that's a question. Why are you asking me? That's a question for your teacher. And they'll say something like, well, I didn't want to bother them, or, well, I wasn't sure if that was okay. And so I think that, as much as teachers, as much as we can make sure that we're clearly communicating to our students that we are accessible and that we are there to support them, and whether that's, positive language in your initial announcements or just in the way your emails are worded, making sure that you're really clearly communicating, I am here as well, I am a resource, and you are not bothering me when you reach out. Because I think there is some of that initial hesitancy from students to reach out to instructors because they are afraid of bothering them. And I think also, as an advisor, we get to have sort of a more personal relationship with our students. And, to a certain extent, that can't be helped. But there are things that we can do as instructors to kind of try and get a little bit of that kind of relationship. And I think part of it is, how can you, without crossing a line and while still being professional, how can you help to present yourself as a human being that is also, has a personality and is present in the course. And things that, I've started doing more recently is, whether it's even just adding little personal, little comics or, putting stories in, just things to sort of personalize the course more. Comics that are related, obviously, related to the course material, but to add a little bit of fun, a little bit of personality into the course so it's not all dry material. And even in the discussion board responses, especially in those getting started discussion boards, coming across as a friendlier, as a friendly person who's also sort of chatting with people and not always being, the formal voice, I think can help to sort of build those relationships.
Just to add some examples to the point that you just said, Cassandra, in my world history class, students definitely hint in their first week what areas they're passionate about, or kind of what hobbies they like and things like that, as you all know. So just occasionally in the general discussions area, what I would say something like, oh, hey, everybody, especially for my Burtonian history-loving students, I have one of my friends is over in London right now. Can you just give me a couple areas in London that would be really awesome for them to investigate? So in that way, you're connecting to the content of the course, you're connecting to things that they're passionate about, and also you're giving agency to the student to take the lead of the course and say, oh, hey, I suggest you go to places A, B, and C for reasons 1, 2, 3, and it just makes them feel really good by giving them the reins of the course and giving them the chance to give some suggestions. And that me just throwing out that simple sentence, there was pages of discussion that came out of that, and it was really fun. The other thing I suggest that we learn from advising, and this also goes off of Cassandra's point, is the speed at which you respond to a student. My advisees, they definitely an advisee will judge an advisor based on how fast they respond. For my advisees that I can successfully respond to them immediately, it makes them feel like I do care about them more. And when I translated that skill to instructing, whenever one of my students in one of my courses would email me, if I got back to them immediately, I've gotten feedback from that saying they're like, oh, your level of engagement is definitely something to be proud of. Thank you so much for being there, and so on and so forth. But the speed at which we can impact on how they feel about the course, how they feel about us, how they feel about the university.
Our Chief Academic Officer has a blog called Academically Speaking, where guests are called upon to share on particular aspects of higher education. Recently, a team lead spoke about the characteristics of an effective instructor, and these included compromise, dedication, passion, responsibility, attention to detail, empathy, effective communication, and leading by example. While all are important, is there one quality that resonates with you the most?
Yeah, I absolutely do agree. Those are all really important qualities. Personally, I think the one that speaks to me the most is really the attention to detail. And I think in part because as an advisor, I've seen how important the small things are to students. So, whether it's something like making sure that, by the time the course is open to students, if nothing else, you have your instructor bio up and a welcome announcement for students to see, and that you've remembered to turn that on, because that's really easy to forget. It's like it is a small thing, but it makes a big difference to students. They do notice when that stuff isn't there, or how quickly a student can panic if something isn't graded, or they think they're getting a 0, or if they submitted late work and we forget to switch over that grade. Or even entering those zeros, how big of it, because it seems like a small thing as an instructor to plug in those zeros every week, but it makes a huge impact on the other end and advising when we're reaching out to students and planning our outreach and things like that, and providing those clear instructions to students, because students they come into the classroom with a lot of anxiety, and so the clear that the instructions are, and then being clear on the details of policy, whether it's the late policy or grading or discussion board requirements, really knowing that you have those nuances down so that the students are getting a consistent feeling across the courses. They really understand what's expected of them, and they're able to do that. I think is probably one of the most important things for me.
I think I definitely agree with everything you just said there, Cassandra. Looking at over these characteristics, again, I feel like they're all really important, but I think the social scientist in me, when I'm thinking about this, is probably going to say empathy is the most important one. And I feel the reason for that is if we can actually imagine what it's like to be that student, I feel like we can get a good sense in how we would like to be treated in that situation. So we have students who are working full-time. They have families. They may have an illness. They may suffer from anxiety. I have some students who can't attend on campus, and they attend online because they have some emotional or health issues. Some students may be struggling with very specific things in their lives that make attending school difficult or more challenging. Sometimes some stuff just pops up. You get a sick child. That tends to, you feel like that's probably going to be more important than turning in your discussion on time. So I feel like if we can empathize with them and imagine what it's like to be that student, what kind of things are they going for, and how would we like to be treated in that situation, I feel like that's a great way for us to also fulfill the rest of these responsibilities, right? So are the rest of these characteristics. I feel like if we have empathy, we'd be more likely to compromise. We recognize the importance of our dedication. We recognize the importance of being responsible and paying attention to detail and things like that. So again, it's probably hard to put these in some kind of hierarchy, but again, I think this is the social scientist in me that thinks that probably empathy is the most important.
Rob, I'm right with you with empathy. What makes SNHU a little bit different from other universities is we completely understand who our students are, and our students are the people out there who have 3 jobs, who have kids and have all these other priorities that are going on, and so we need to really be aware of that, and we need to definitely be empathetic. That's the biggest key service that we can offer them as an SNHU instructor.
As a psychology instructor, I definitely third that statement about empathy. And as you said, Rob, with empathy, many of the other qualities would really follow suit. Advising calls them the brand behaviors, and instructors know them as the faculty promise. However, they really are the same set of principles that guide our interactions and our relationships with students. As an instructor, do you have a favorite faculty promise tenet, and do you embody this tenet the same way in your academic advising role?
Definitely the biggest faculty promise and brand behavior that I try to exude when I'm working with my students or my advisees is demonstrating care. If you can successfully demonstrate care to each of your students in your classroom, you're going to have a major impact on them. You're no longer just going to be a facilitator or someone who's just there grading the assignments. You're going to be an actual human being to them, and human beings are what make lasting impacts on an individual. That it's not the course, it's not the content, it's the person. They're impacted and they're impressioned by the person, by the human being. So the only way to do that is to show that you care. It's to show your humanity. And so that's definitely the biggest brand behavior for me.
Thanks, Vasilios. I agree with all of that. I think that those are good points. I had a hard time picking just one, so I went rogue a little bit and picked 2. I started the be accurate, be right it's really important to me personally, and as a advisor, I see just how important it is that students are getting accurate information the first time, whether it's from their advisor or from their instructor or their admissions counselor or anywhere in the process, just how important them being able to trust that information is right makes a really big impact on students. But on the other side, that never give up on a student who's putting in the effort to succeed is also, it's a huge part of being an advisor and, of course, an instructor as well. And I think as a teacher, I have to really remember the second part of that behavior or of that promise too, which is that on a student who is putting in the effort to succeed. I think, sometimes we can get hung up a little bit on those students who aren't. And I think really remembering that we need to put all of our energy into those students who are, and that, we make that promise that whatever you put in, I'm going to put into. So if you're working really hard and you're really dedicated, then I'm going to work really hard for you, and I'm going to be really dedicated for you. I think, I had a student last term, for example, who came in and, she was really upset with her grades in the first 2 weeks, and she wasn't meeting the expectations. And so she spent the first 2 weeks just kind of complaining, and the communication with her was sort of, a little different. And then she kind of came around in week 3 and she's like, well, I want to do better. And then we got to end up having a really collaborative process where we were really talking a lot, and I was giving her the opportunity to sort of do some early submissions and work with me on really understanding what those expectations are. And I think that's really the key is getting those students to a place where they're willing to put in the effort, and then making sure that you're meeting them halfway.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you guys have all said so far as well. I took a little bit of a different approach here. For me, I always feel like the most important one is the take ownership of student issues and be a problem solver. So empathy, being able to know your students and population, all that stuff is really important as well. But I think when it comes down to it, for me, if a student has an issue, it's really easy to say, well, you know what, this is an IT problem, I can't solve it. Or this is another problem, I can't really solve this, you need to talk to somebody else. Even if that is the case, let's say it's beyond my expertise, I'm definitely not going to be able to help a student install Windows, whatever, or Microsoft Office or something like that. So I would have to talk with our help desk for that. But at the same time, I feel like the being a problem solver and taking ownership of that issue means following up with the student. Were you able to talk with the help desk? Here's their number, I can help you with this. And just kind of encouraging them to use those resources as they need them. If it is a problem and something that I can solve, then I will definitely solve it. And I feel like it can be easy to just say, well, that's not really part of my job. But the one thing I always like to kind of remember is that our job really is to help students graduate. Our job really is to help them succeed, help them master the materials, and all the little things that go along with that, that contribute to that goal. I feel like those are also part of our job as well. And even if it's something that we don't have an expertise on and we can't solve, we can still take ownership by following up, by helping the students, by outreaching those people on the students' behalf and things like that, and doing our best to kind of always solve those problems, always take ownership, and recognizing that as part of our job here, it's to make sure that we give the students the tools and the ability to meet those goals.
That's really a great high note for us to leave off on, Rob. Thank you so much, and thank you to Cassandra and Vasilios for meeting with me today.
This podcast is offered through the Department of Faculty Training and Development here at COCE. If you have ideas for future podcast episodes and/or shows, we encourage you to submit these ideas through our online adjunct faculty portal or via email at facultytraining@snhu.edu. Thank you for listening, and join us next time.
My name is Rob, and I'm here to say you gotta be a problem solver. It's gonna be very 80s.
That's awesome.